Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please remember that if you like what you hear, leave your rating or review on your chosen podcast platform. We thank you in advance, as it also helps new listeners discover our show. In this episode, we are joined by Audley Bell, a retired chief audit executive, most recently with World Vision, a humanitarian aid organization helping children, families, and their communities overcome poverty and injustice. Diana and Audley begin by discussing the importance of taking an inventory of oneself to determine strengths and areas needing improvement as a way of improving their soft skills. They continue their talk on conflict management and the need to avoid the blame game by setting the expectation up front that mistakes are going to be made, which fosters a non-judgmental and open environment. They conclude their discussion by examining the merits of face-to-face feedback and its timely importance. Now let's have a conversation.
Welcome, everyone, to the Soft Skills Salon, an audible think tank on soft skills. I am still Diana Kowarski, and we are going to be engaging in this episode yet again with a fantastic guest who has done the pre-work, and that pre-work is selecting amongst the 15 questions in our soft skills impact questionnaire, the questions that are of the most particular interest to our guest, in the hopes of us having as informed a conversation as possible. Our conversations are based on the affirmation that we have here at the Soft Skills Group and the Soft Skills Salon podcast that conversation is the currency of communication. So let's have a conversation. And today we are joined by Audley Bell, a retired chief audit executive with over 28 years as a chief audit executive. He spent the last 13 years of his internal audit career working for two NGOs, World Vision International and Habitat for Humanity International, both with operations in over 80 countries at the time across the globe. In addition to numerous successes over the span of his career, Audley is a certified public accountant, a certified internal audit, a certified information system auditor, and a certified fraud examiner. And I am certain also a certified fantastic guest on this podcast. He has received a Doctor of Humane Letters DHL from Wingate University. He's also an inspiring tennis professional. But indeed, he gave that up to pursue his degree and career in accounting shortly after losing out for the qualifiers for the U.S. Open in 1973. And what a great occasion and memory that must be. Audley, welcome to the podcast and thank you.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for having me.
A real pleasure. Where do you find yourself today, Audley? Where are you on the planet?
I am in New York, Long Island, New York.
Fantastic. Audley, I greatly appreciate your time, and I know that we're going to jump right into our conversation by starting out with the first of your selected questions from our questionnaire, and it reads, what do you recommend others do to improve their soft skills based on your own experience and certainly your specific experience as a CAE or Chief Audit Executive? What would you say?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to take an inventory of yourself and, determine what your soft skills strengths are and where you need to improve. And for myself, I think listening is critical soft skill to have. Empathy, and also it's important to identify someone that you admire of having outstanding soft skills to help you.
Absolutely. I know there's so much more for you to share here. I need to interject, however. I loved the very beginning of your answer of taking an inventory of yourself. I want to pause there, Audley, because there's been a great theme that I've noticed in our podcast guests, and that is about this idea, whether we call it an inventory of self or self-reflection or intrapersonal or self-awareness even. And I would put all of those somewhat in the same category. So when I hear you say inventory of self, my ears perk up because there's so much to be said about that activity. Can you tell
Yes.
me a bit more about that?
Yes. You have to take time out and reflect. I think it's important that you do that, because if not, you'll just be moving forward without focus. And I think this will help to focus you as to what you need to prioritize, in terms of strengthening. So
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And then you continued and were speaking about finding, I believe, a role model or someone who you find admirable in displaying soft skills. How have you gone about doing that in the span of your own career?
Well, you have to listen to and watch for those who lead by example. That's important. So, those who walk as they say, walk the talk.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I would look for. Those individuals who say what they mean and do what they say.
I understand. And there's a theme there of being an observer of others. And perhaps that's the other side to that inventory of self idea that you started with. Maybe it's actively trying to keep pace with one's own abilities, capabilities, skills, as well as observing those of others. Is that the other side to this?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Someone who you can emulate, I think that's important. Yep.
Absolutely. I hear you. And so you've mentioned the idea also in your response around the significance of listening. So still on that observational side, what is it that you are actively listening for?
Listening for example, empathy. I think one has to listen to the emotions of of their team members and stakeholders, and listening for inspirational messages, and also information that you can learn from. So being attentive to what's being said, and then listen for takeaways, ideas that you can take away to improve your soft skills.
I'm very intrigued, Audley, because it's a pleasure having you on this podcast. There's so much that I like to have stretched in my own thinking about individuals within audit or within any specialized stream of a technical orientation, be it in telecommunications or in medicine or retail, et cetera. So to hear someone with so much experience within that audit industry speak about listening to emotions, that stretches how I admit fully that I have thought about audit professionals and the focus perhaps I have mistakenly assigned to them in how they engage with others. How wrong have I been, Audley?
Well, I think it's 50-50. There are some who I consider myself, as an evolved CAE, but you still have the traditional chief audit executive. I should explain that. That haven't really. They're still historical mindset or the
Right.
backward thinking mindset, and that doesn't work today in this dynamic and disruptive operating environment that we're in. So you have to be able to embrace change and to be ready and resilient, in order to deal with flexible and adaptable to deal with the current environment.
Certainly. And your cue there of listening for empathy and listening for emotions, I understand that as an example of embracing change and or engaging in resiliency, as emotions can be quite dynamic and responsive and reactive as well as proactive. And
Right.
the assumption is that we're working with humans.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. If I may, let's move to the next question that you selected, and it was number 9 from our questionnaire, and it's one of the ones that is near and dear to a lot of the time that I spend teaching and working with some of my clients. And question number 9 reads, what is your favorite way? Now, Audley, I warn you, it doesn't ask you what is a way or the way. It asks you for your favorite way. It's quite particular. What is your favorite way to solve interpersonal conflicts or problems on your team? What comes to mind?
Meeting face to face. I think that's so important. But in terms of, I think first you have to understand what the issue or, the problem is. And once you have that understanding, then you can, you gather all the facts, and then you want to have a face-to-face conversation. And it is in a non-threatening, type of environment where you can openly discuss the situation and, get the different perspective and try to find common ground. So that's my approach. Having that conversation, hearing the different perspective, different sides of the issue, and then try to find common ground so that we can come to an agreement and then move forward.
What I hear are 5 distinct actions from that great response that you provided me. What I heard was that you said that it's remarkably important to understand the issue as item 1. Secondly, to ensure you have the facts. Thirdly, I heard you say that there's the emphasis then on a face-to-face conversation to be, orchestrated. Fourth, that this is necessarily conducted or engaged in a non-threatening manner. And that 5th point, or the last one, was in seeking common ground. So amongst those points, I find it interesting that understanding the issue is that first one that you spoke of, because so much of looking at what is actually the common ground, your last and 5th issue, relies on maybe doing some research initially. Is that right?
Yes.
And so when there is a conflict or a problem, what is the way for us to distinguish between understanding the issue versus the facts? How have you distinguished between the two in your career?
The issue, the fact, you have to have the hard evidence, factual evidence there. So, and that might not be in alignment with what you're hearing, from the different sides. So that's why it's important to, gather all the information. You obtain, you interview the various, members of the team, gather that information, and then based on your knowledge and other information that's available, you can bring that to the table as well,
Mm-hmm.
To be able to move forward. And then, what's important is in resolving issues, you got to get to the root cause. What is the root cause? And if you don't get to the root cause, then it's not going to go away. You're not going to be able to have a sustainable solution. So yeah, but that's how I see it.
I hear you. So there's a role here as we return to perhaps the true orientation of the question. What is your favorite way to solve interpersonal conflicts or problems on your team? That you as a leader play a role, and I'm going to use big air quotes on a podcast, but big air quotes as a third party or a mediator almost between or amongst those who may be engaged in some sort of conflict. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 points I would ask you to consider for me here, Audley. The first is some of the social science I've been exposed to lately that I've been thinking about and used in a few of my own conversations with clients has been looking at a space and whether or not there actually is a space when it does come to conflict or problem solving between the question, who is to blame and or what happened? And sometimes if we think about those 2 questions, who is to blame and or what happened as a very simple Venn diagram, there might be some overlap. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time, there's a huge cavern between those 2. So my first point is I think those 2 questions are underappreciated in some conflict resolution opportunities. What do you think of those 2 questions?
Yeah, the blame game. I'm not a fan of that. I think it's important to understand that there are going to be mistakes or failures along the way in any situation. So if you set that expectation up front, listen, especially in this constantly changing and disruptive operating environment. Things are happening so quickly, and you don't have the time to really do research and study. You have to make decisions very quickly, so mistakes will be made. So we have to probably, once we do the due diligence, and if a mistake is made, then you quickly learn from the mistake and then improve on it, make the necessary adjustments and move forward. But so I think setting that tone up front, I think it's important where, honesty, transparency, and timely sharing of information. So, and not being afraid to fail. I think when that fear is interjected into the situation, then that's when, you're going to get the different perspective.
Absolutely. And that blame game is why the who is to blame focus that so many leaders and contemporaries can have is perhaps a recycled and perhaps redundant use of time. As you've suggested, what happened is the opportunity for lessons learned. And as you said a few moments ago, the whole point is to keep moving. Right? So that we can hopefully figure out what that common ground is and move forward. So the other part that I would say to you that this has brought to the surface of my thinking, when you mentioned root cause, I'm a big fan of the 5 whys of root cause analysis. I'm sure that that has played even just a cursory role in some of your work during the course of your career.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
There's something to be said for unpacking what can be the correct problem to solve versus
Right,
being distracted by one of the symptoms. And as you said,
right,
need to get to it to actually then see the yield of your efforts.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Too many band-aids.
Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. And you might not even need a Band-Aid. There might just be a little splinter underneath it all, or you might need some sutures, right? Once you
Right,
get there.
right, right. Yes, yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I understand. We're going to move to another favorite question of mine that you've selected, and that's number 12 from our list. And it carries on a theme that you've already mentioned, which is the role and or value of being face to face. So let's talk a bit about that in response to item number 12, which reads, how do you provide feedback to others, be they colleagues, staff, leadership, etc.? So what are your thoughts around feedback?
Yes, that is very important. And providing timely feedback is critical in today's environment. And the best way to do that is, again, face to face. And you do that in, as I mentioned before, in a um, non-threatening way, a polite and non-threatening way. And again, honest, being honest about the situation, looking at the what the issue is, the improvement that's needed, and then have a discussion as to, the what the other
Mhm.
what the team member is thinking. You have to hear their perspective as well, whether it might be isolated issue. They may be having some other underlying issue that we're not aware about. So again, listening also uh, plays a key role in providing feedback. You need to understand
Mhm.
what is their situation, that individual situation, and be able to make sure that we're making the right decision going forward and providing, valuable feedback.
There's a lot in your response already. So during this COVID era, when working virtually, and you and I are face to face via a platform, I'm in Toronto and you're in Long Island. So when you say face to face, do you mean in person, in fact?
That's an excellent point. That's in person is number one, because then the body language, the eye contact, you don't get that on the virtual.
Right.
So but we have to work with what we have, and so this is what we have right now, so we work with that to the best of our ability.
So perhaps it's a close second to in
Yes.
person.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
the other comment you've made, I'd love us to spend some time playing in, and you've used the word timely. And feedback is at times, depending on the organization or even the leader that I'm working with, a catch-all phrase for everything, including the kitchen sink, or it's rather specifically defined within an organization and perhaps some space between those extremes. So I'm not sure if there is a dictionary meaning that we can refer to that says this is indeed feedback, where we have some universal application. So with that in mind, what does timely feedback look like to your experience?
I would say immediately after an assignment, for example, right? We need to provide any improvement opportunities, that was observed or noticed, and provided right away. I mean, you don't wait a month. I think because in audit, that staff is going to move to another assignment, and if there is an area that needs improvement, you want to address that right away. Because if not, that behavior will carry over to the next project, and that we don't want that. So
on and so on and so
Right.
on. Absolutely.
Right.
You hit on a point that I feel very strongly about in improving feedback, no matter how it may be defined within an organization. And that is the recognition of feedback being in response to what is observable or noted, which is a big contrast to providing feedback that may be speculating about a person's motivations or someone's skills or abilities. So I think in fact, I know there's a great deal of value in reiterating those words that you said, that feedback that focuses on what is observable, what is behavioral. We have a much higher likelihood of one, understanding what that feedback is, because we can depersonalize from a behavior. It's not who we are, it's what it is I may have or may not have done. And then we have a higher likelihood of applying or of avoiding in the next iteration, whether it's for another audit project the next month or the next fiscal year, or et cetera, as you suggested. So I think there's a lot in that piece. The last part that I'm going to ask you to give me a little bit more information and a bit more of your thinking on is you've used the term non-threatening a couple of times. And in my notes, I can see that I've written that down, as I do take notes to make sure I'm comprehending. Can you let me know, and we know that ideally it's face-to-face or in person, so how would you, to your experience, orchestrate or curate a non-threatening feedback session?
So you want to make the person or the staff feel comfortable. It's maybe have an icebreaker to start the conversation. Talk about something that's not related, as a sport event or something. But you want it to be a cordial discussion, I would say, and it's not to reprimand the staff. And so you want the staff to be comfortable, and so you try to diffuse any kind of tension that that may may manifest itself.
Certainly. And when you are the leader of such a group, as you've said a few times, setting those expectations early on in how you conduct yourself and how it is that you are expecting others to also conduct themselves, that you have that collateral on which to build, so that feedback is contextualized, so that it is hopefully hospitable and absolutely not threatening. I understand. We have one more question that we're going to wrap our heads around, and it reads, how do you define confidence? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one, Audley. How do you define confidence?
Well, confidence is believing in yourself. You have to have self-confidence, believe in, what your strengths, and being positive, I think that's important as well.
So let's take those 2 points. Confidence is believing in yourself and being positive. If we start on the first one, how have you in your career gone about doing that? How have you believed in yourself? How do you know that you've done it?
First, you have to make sure you have the knowledge and the experience, and that's from the training that you have done. So having that knowledge and experience or expertise, that's confidence. And I should add also having confidence if you're the trust that your stakeholders put in you, then that is also enhancement to the confidence. But I think the important thing is, the expertise. Make sure you have the expertise and the knowledge and the experience.
So that you can indeed look at what you bring to the virtual or the literal table and believing in those experiences or those competencies or those educational, hopefully, legacy that you bring with you. That makes sense. Right. And then the other part of your definition was being positive, and that's a loaded pair of words, being positive. I'm certain we could speak at great length about that. However, I'd appreciate some of your thoughts in expanding on that. What does that mean? And how does being positive correlate to a definition of confidence?
Well, you look at the other side. If you're negative, then if you have a negative posture, then that's that's not confidence in yourself, right? Positive. I think. Well, I don't want to use the word optimistic, but you have to be positive if you're going to be confident. I think it goes hand in hand because you have to show your strength, and being positive will, I think, enhance that.
Absolutely. And how have you yourself been positive and continue to be positive as you've demonstrated in our brief chat today?
I just believing in what you're doing, and then again, self-awareness is important. Knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and don't try to, be positive about something you don't know, right? I think that's very important to be aware of your strength. And
Audley, that takes us back to one of your very first comments about taking an inventory of self and how we've come full circle. I'm so tickled by that comment you've made about knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, and circling that back to your original comments about perhaps self-reflection, and then, of course, looking outwards in terms of how others might indeed be providing you with some more data around their own choices of what they do or do not do. So that brings us full circle and means that I get to ask you now, as I ask our guests all the time, is there a particular book or resource or video that you might recommend to our listeners?
Yes, there is one book that I highly recommend. It's People-Centric Skills, and it's by Danny Goldberg. And it's by Wiley Publishers.
Fantastic. And I have to say, I have heard the title, but I have not read this one. So it is on my summer reading list, and hopefully it'll be on the summer reading list for many of the podcast listeners as well. Audley Bell, thank you so very much for taking the time and for the fantastic insights from your career as a chief audit executive, and certainly the great perspective that you can bring to the listeners on soft skills in general. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, and thanks again for having me.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode, and remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.